This is the Infinite Podcast with my beloved friend Ulf and me, Øystein. Right now I am actually traveling. I'm on the other side of the pit. I'm in California. Ulf is back in Norway, so I'm on my own over here. And I'm meeting with today a really exciting woman. Her name is Kim Trotman, and she's a beautiful soul. She works with spirituality. She works with regression, like past life regression, going back to past lives to heal and resolve trauma and experiences. She is a very insightful soul with a lot of knowledge about how everything is connected. And I'm so excited to share our conversation with you. I met Kim the first time on my travel back in 2015, which was the beginning of my huge awakening. And now I'm actually back here in Newport, California. And where better to start than to meet with Kim again for a new regression. And before we go into our conversation, I'd like to share my project, Finding Malibu. I'm writing the book Finding Malibu. It's a traveling journal, you could also say, about my travels into the spiritual realm and also into the physical realm of following my intuition. It's a book that is in the writing right now, and meeting with Kim is actually part of the story. So if you want to find out more on that, visit my webpage, findingmalibu.com. I would also like to add, when we talk about bending spoons during the podcast, you can actually watch a movie where there's a link attached to this episode where Kim is demonstrating how it's done. And now, let's meet with Kim Trotman. Welcome, Kim.
Hi.
It's nice to... I'm so glad that you wanted to be a guest on this podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's fun to talk about these things.
It is.
Yeah.
And for our guests, just want to mention the way that I know you, and that's that through my travels in California,
Mm-hmm.
I actually don't remember how I found you. I think it was a Google search or something.
It could be.
The first time, because the first time we met was in 2015.
Yeah.
And I came here to get a regression, and that was a powerful experience. But what I remember most is the conversations we had. Like, I don't remember how long I was here, but it felt like it was at least 2 or 3 hours, and
Yeah.
it was, to me, back then, but also this time when we met yesterday, it's like I'm just so grateful for those kind of conversations. You know?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Me too. I love it.
And especially that first time, it was like so good to meet someone who could kind of hold space to explore and be open about things. So
Yeah. I actually, a lot of clients and people that come in, they'll tell me things like they've never, they can't talk to anybody in their life about those things. And I've thought about I should start a support group or something for older souls that, know those things and want to talk about them.
Yeah, because I think when I came here the first time, I had started opening up things. So I was just getting a few friends in my life at that time where we could start talking about these things. But in the beginning, it was really hard to find such people. And every time I did find someone, it was like, wow, I'm so grateful for this because I've been longing for it,
Yeah. A lot of times I think, you kind of vibrate at a certain place, and your aura, your energy around you kind of reflects where you're vibrating at. And usually my clients tend to be more in your chakras, your energy centers match like the light spectrum, and so your heart chakra is like green, and then you go up into blue, which is your throat, and that's communication, and and then you go into like your third eye area, which is lavenders, And then the crown is kind of like all colors, which makes white.
Yeah.
And most of my clients are in that range. I occasionally get someone with some orange, which is down below your, solar plexus, kind of in your reproductive area. And those are usually really creative people.
Yeah.
And sometimes as people talk, yellows will come up in their coloring, and it's like their sense of self. So say if they have a green aura and it starts to wash out into kind of a light with yellows, then I know like they're insecure about something or worry about something. And so I notice when people are kind of starting out and they're trying to vibrate lower to fit in with the world, and you just hit those moments where you're like, it just doesn't feel right or feel real, and you start to kind of really have some shifts in your truth and what you start to accept what
Yeah.
and then your vibration starts to kind of shift up and get faster and in a different wavelength. And a lot of times the people you knew, they're just not as interesting, and they think you've gotten a little weird, and then you start attracting people that vibrate like you do. Yeah. So at the new place, and a lot of times when people have past life regressions like you did, it's kind of a weird core shift. Yeah. It does sort of realign something, and then often you understand things better and you feel better, but then you also might have your life change a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. So can you tell something about what it is? Because as we now know, you're doing regression. But how can you explain what that actually is, and also tell something about how you started working with that, and what's your background to find the work that you do?
Well, past life regression, I trained with Dr. Brian Weiss, and he's a psychiatrist, and he wrote a book called Many Lives, Many Masters, and he's written other books after that, but he basically, left brain, Harvard trained, just very scientific, and he was working with a client and she wasn't improving and she had phobias, and they worked for about 2 years and tried medications, and finally he thought he'd try hypnosis and maybe see if possibly she had something from her childhood she couldn't remember. And so they were kind of looking around, found possibly a couple things, and finally he just said, okay, well, just go back to when it started. And then all of a sudden she started describing a tidal wave like 3,000-4,000 years ago, and seeing people that, she recognized as people she knows now, but, they all basically drown. And one of her phobias was water, was really getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
And so when she came out of it, and I think she was like a born-again or evangelical Christian, so she didn't believe in past lives, and he didn't. And so they were both kind of like, like that was weird. And yeah, but it was so dramatic. And then when she came back the next time, she was way better. Like the phobia had almost gone away. And so they both thought, well, I guess if that works, let's look around. And she had talked about, excuse me, masters, which I perceive as guides, and she saw them like a council or something. And so every once in a while she would say something or reference them, and at one point she started talking to him in a kind of a different wording, and said to him, this is what you're going to do. And she told him things about his dad that had passed away and his son that died at like his heart was in backwards or something. Really specific weird things. And it was before the internet, and she had no way to know it. And she was saying that she was one of these masters, it was just channeling through. And then afterwards, she didn't remember any of it, but he recorded the session. So he had to do like a real cognitive shift at that point and kind of come to terms with the fact that something was going on that he couldn't explain. And it just, after that, you know, it just seemed like, you know, his life path was kind of laid out for him. And so when I used to do civil design, and I designed highways and toll roads in the area and land surveying and, you know,
different thing.
Manly stuff. Manly left brain stuff. And I had finally understood my karma from that period, and I felt like I got kind of led out of it after that into, you know, what I do now, all very seemingly fluky, you know. And just to back up a bit, I've always seen auras and spirits, and my dad's mom was very intuitive and astral projected, and she was kind of, I guess, spiritualist, I would say, living in Washington State. And she would talk to me about it. And, you know, I had an experience that I was really adamant about, that I had a little man in my crib, and he took my sock, and I made my parents take the crib apart and look for it, and couldn't find it. And, you know, so it really made an impression. So it's kind of like the family joke, but I knew it happened, you know. And I just had different experiences along the way. But, you know, my dad was a nuclear physicist, and my mom, you know, worked in like Caltech at the wind tunnel, and my sister's a lawyer, and my brother's an engineer, and I'm married to a chemical engineer. So, you know, there's a lot of left brain going on there.
Yeah.
And I, of course, was, you know, if I had my just first wish, I guess I thought I would study art, but that wasn't practical. So I was going to school in business management and marketing, and I just started drafting to make money on the side. And it was right before computer graphics came out, and everything was still mainframe. And I learned to do computer graphics just at the dawn of it. And, you know, plotters you'd type in commands, and plotters would go draw the picture, and you'd change the paper. And then we got screens, and then, you know, so it's pretty back before the undo button, basically. And then PCs came out. And but yeah, everywhere I went, because I was working in a male-dominated field, and my karma had to do with standing up for myself. And I was always really sensitive and quiet, and my sister was really bossy, and my mom was pretty, you know, ADHD, I would have to say, you know, probably undiagnosed. But so I was quiet, and my brother, you know, was younger, and my dad was fairly quiet. And so I just got run over a lot, basically, by my mom and sister. And then when I got into this field, women just weren't really, there weren't hardly any women doing it. And so I got a lot of, you know, like most of the guys were fine, but I'd get the one or two that were very, like, not nice and would be critical. And it would just trigger this thing in me where I'd show them, and I'd learn more, and I'd, you know, really study up and get good at whatever it was, and then I'd finally leave and get a better job and think, oh, screw them, you know. And it just kept happening everywhere I went, you know. And I was trading up, you know, and finally I landed in a place where I felt pretty respected, you know. And I, you know, worked on the toll roads for 12 years and doing conceptual design, and then I went and started an office with an engineer, and I was head of CAD department, head of the IT department, and setting all that up, and there was this little engineer, and I just thought I was going to have to kill him. I mean, he just was so irritating, and it would just trigger me, and I'd just be like, God, why is there just... I remember having this big thought of, is there just, like, is this what it is? There's all these jerks out there?
Yeah.
And I just got this big wave of... And I'm sure it was guides, you know, like, well, why do you believe him? You know, and you're good at what you do. And I thought, I am really good at what I do, you know, and it wasn't until that point, it took that for it to dawn on me that I was creating the whole thing, because I had an insecurity that I didn't belong there. I didn't have a degree in engineering, even though I was working with all engineers and getting paid like an engineer. Yeah. But I didn't have a degree in it. And so, and then, you know, just, I guess being bossy, my sister was supposed to be the smart one, you know, and so I, all that time I felt insecure about that I didn't belong, and it would attract that one or two people that would realize they could kind of hold power over me by not giving me approval or saying, oh, that's good. Everybody else could be saying it, but I'd focus on the one or two that were being jerks, and try to show them I deserved to be there. And it's really funny. It just kind of healed at that point. And even that little engineer, he started being nice and respectful, and he was rude to other people, and they were like, kind of like, what is happening? But something shifted in my energy field. And then that stopped. And then it was just shortly after that I was having kind of a thought of, I'd like to work from home and just part-time and you know, maybe do art part of the time. I was thinking when I retired, and then within a month my boss asked me if I'd work from home, and I was kind of upset about it because I thought, oh, he's trying to get his son-in-law in there, but I made him buy me stuff to work at home, and then when I was working from home after 6 months, and it took me about a month to realize I had actually manifested that, and I asked my husband, what would you think if I went out on my own? Because I brought the clients in, I trained everybody to do the work, I, you know, have all the files, I set everything up myself. And he was kind of nervous because his dad worked same place 30 some years. He'd been at his job 30 some years. But he said, okay. And I didn't want to steal clients, so I thought, well, I'll just see what happens. The next morning I get a phone call to come into the office. Yeah. And it's funny, the day that I asked him, I asked for a sign, and I got it. So I thought, okay. The next morning they called me to come in, and I'm like, are you kidding me? And I went in there, and they laid me and everybody off doing the drawings. And they were trying to tick off the boss, you know, because he had hired all of us and set up the office. But so I was just like, okay, you know, and I just went and called the clients and said, I've got all the stuff at my house, and I'll cut your price a little and, you know, do the work from home. And they're like, okay. And so I doubled what I was making, and, you know, and then it just progressed from there. So I felt very led out of it. Yeah. And I was doing readings at a couple of places, and that was all kind of odd. I mean, I kind of almost stumbled into the one, and my other work was slowing, and the lady looked extremely familiar to me. I didn't know why, and we started talking, and I'm sure I have a past life with her. And I said, I've thought about doing readings, and I didn't know she was a reader. And then she said, oh, come on, I'll introduce you to the manager. Just, you know, try it. And I was like, what? and he had me do a reading for him, and then he said, well, I only have 6 hours a week, and normally they would have you stay there 30 hours a week no matter whether you were working or not. And I couldn't have done that. So I was like, okay. And then I went home and told my husband, and he about had a heart attack and thought I'd have to grow my fingernails and wear a turban or something after that. And then I started, because it was pure strangers, I started understanding what was my own intuition and, what was my logical mind. Because when you're reading friends, there's always that thought of, well, maybe I just know that. And in hindsight, I think I'd always been kind of reading people and giving them advice and not understanding I was kind of doing that. But and so then it just went from there to training with Brian Weiss and learning past life regression. And then at a certain point, I heard this more information that I needed to be more visible. And I was like, oh, God, no, because I really hated to be, like out in public, and things like that had happened to me where I'd gotten pushed out and just, it was a phobia. And right after that, I got asked to do a podcast. And then my friend's daughter was in a class at Trotman University, and she said, I feel like you should meet the teacher. Like, you talk about energy and she talks about it. And I thought, well, that sounds like an interesting class at a university. And then she told me after about a week or two that the teacher wanted me to speak at the class. And I was like, wow. Okay, I'll do it. Because that's what I thought when I heard that you need more visible. Is okay, you show me what it is. And then that all happened. And then like a day and a half before I was going to speak, the teacher said, oh, you can have the whole 3 hours. 3 hours. And I just was like, oh my God. And so I had already decided, I was going to talk about clients' cases, things that had happened, and then show them spoon bending. So at the time I didn't have a supplier. Now I buy them in bulk, but but I told the teacher to have them bring in their own spoons. And then my friend's daughter, Brittany, she said one of the guys had volunteered to be hypnotized and do a past life regression from the class. And I thought, the induction, the part where you're hypnotizing the person is it's a little long. And I thought they might get bored. So I decided I would just go ahead and try to do a group hypnosis. So I just really put myself out there, and it all went great. And there were some skeptics, and one of them had a really involved past life, that he remembered. And one of the other skeptical guys was really good at spoon bending. And so it was really fun to see because a lot of them were like pre-med, and they were just taking the class because they thought it'd be easy credit. And it's just fun to see kind of the shock or the seeds planted, I guess. So
also the spoon bending, the whole spoon bending thing, when you showed me that when I was there in 2015, that was like, I've heard about it before, and there actually is a spoon right in front of us here that is bent. I've heard about it before, and I hadn't thought much about it, but when you did it, and also when you have had me have the experience myself of doing it, it was it really kind of lifted me out of some patterns, without me choosing to do so. It's just like at some point your brain realizes you cannot hold on to the old paradigm anymore. It's impossible. Because you can truly see yourself, it doesn't work.
Well, and you're influencing something that you really shouldn't be able to influence that way. And I actually, at a conference, it was called the UFO Congress, there was an engineer there that he worked for Boeing for 30 years, and one of my friends was there, and he said, oh, she's a real deal, she can bend spoons. And so I showed him, and I didn't, unbeknownst to me, this just really caught his attention, and he contacted me like 3 years later and wanted to have lunch, and he had taken it into Boeing and showed a materials specialist and a couple engineers, and the materials specialist was saying, that's not possible. It was a trick. And he's like, no, I saw her do it. Like, it was like right there. And yeah.
But it's like, when I showed it to some friends as well, it's like at some point I start questioning myself again. Like, was this always possible anyways? Or there is no trick, there is no kind of shift, or there is no nothing? Because now it's natural that of course it's possible. So so you can just the kind of miracle is gone in a way, you know? Yeah.
Well, and you know, every time I've had people say that, like in class, like, and what's hilarious is sometimes the really strong guys they can't wrap their mind around it. And then the littlest person in the class or kids will just be like, oh, this is neat. And so simple. But it really is just knowing you can do it.
Yeah.
And it's the same as like healing energy or prayer energy. It's just projecting your energy and the thought to do it, like an intention to do it.
Yeah.
It's funny, I don't know if you can see that big spoon over there. It's like a soup ladle type of thing. Yeah. Or my husband brought that. And
so just for our listeners, how big would you say it is? It's like, how many inches or centimeters?
Maybe like 3 inches across and 4.5 or 5.
So quite big.
It's a big spoon, and it's thick. And he said, can you bend this? And I can usually look at something now and just feel if I can do it or not. And you have some days where you're just don't have a lot of energy, and other days where it's so simple. Yeah. But I knew I could, and so I just went ahead and did it. And he's just like, oh my God, because he had tried it, and he can bend things. Just, you know, he's not as fluid. Like he has to work himself up, and he's got a heavier left brain side to him. But I usually tell people, if you question it, just bend something heavier.
Yeah.
Like try something that, you know, is harder. Yeah.
Wow.
But it definitely kind of shows you, you know, that it's called psychokinesis, you know, and there's that guy Uri Geller that kind of put it on the map. I'd never heard of it before that, but it fascinated me ever since I heard of him. And so, I learned from a aeronautical engineer named Jack Houck that has a website that, you know, hopefully it's still on there. He passed away, but he's very technical about it, but he learned it in Russia. And so, it's a interesting thing. Helps clear those blocks.
Yeah, it does. Wow. So another thing I thought was interesting about what you said is like this, when you sense that, okay, you need to be more out there, or you need to, can you describe how does that feel to you, that kind of inner guidance or intuition? How do you work with that in your life?
It's interesting because it reminds me of telepathy or something. And when I do readings, the information's kind of a combination of things. Like a lot of times it just feels like you know something all of a sudden. A lot of times I kind of perceive it coming from some place, you know, around me. And when I'm doing readings, sometimes I'll hear words, or I'll get an emotion for a moment, or I'll feel something in my body, and it's like a combination of all those characteristics. And they call them the clairsentience, clairvoyance, but you know, in real normal terms, you know, it's just how we receive information. And it's hard to describe because it's usually not specific words. It's just like a thought and a knowing that's what it is.
How is there a way to kind of train yourself that you would recommend? Like how do you explore that field if it's new to you? Like,
a lot of times like I'm listening to this book right now called American Cosmic, and she studies religion and as it relates to ufology, and she's wound up like being friends with Jacques Vallée and all these high-tech guys that work in, the weird black budget projects. And the couple of them have described it like they just kind of get in almost like a meditative state, and then they realize thoughts are coming in that they just seem different from their own. There is kind of because it will seem kind of almost like as if some person sitting across from you said something like that to you. It just doesn't seem like something like you're imagining things or daydreaming. It's like it just drops in.
How do you trust it? I think that was one of my phases to go through. How can I trust this? Or is it could it be influenced by dark energy or all these things? How do you find a balance and the trust to?
Kind of what I've just discovered over time, because when I was really little and I saw spirits, it could have been a cat. I just really didn't know how to feel about any of it. Then you start watching movies, and then religion plays a lot for people, and everything's the devil, or it's just scary, and so then I went through that phase, and then we were living in a haunted house at the time. It was brand new, but it was Indian ground, and who knows, maybe it used to be orange orchards. Excuse me. And they could have, it could have been burial ground or sacred ground. I don't know, but I'd wake up and there'd be someone standing at the end of my bed, and I had my name called out of the closet. I was just terrorized. And I actually, when I was a teenager in that house, I read The Exorcist, and that just really put me over the top, with fear. And there are those energies. I mean, I feel like I kind of got a training in that from my guides, because they do exist. And when I worked at the 12-step store doing readings, I saw attachments with people, and usually it's people that have blacked out, a lot, or they've been abused or molested. A lot of times things attach when they're kids, or when they're in heavy drug use or alcoholism or something, they can allow something to attach. Usually there's a little bit of an agreement, and people that have it kind of know they do. And it's like when you're talking to somebody that has something like that, they'll change. You'll see almost like you're talking to a different person all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you've picked up a hitchhiker and they want to drive part of the time. And
what do you mean that's something they've chosen to do in a sense, or what's that what you're saying? Or
well, through being all terrorized and realizing there really were scary things, I feel like I got trained to understand my own fight and flight, my own fear, versus what actually is creepy energy. And I had to kind of learn to distinguish that, and then not be afraid of it, because it's really not that powerful. And it took me a while to understand that. And when normal, say somebody's, the other day I had a woman come to the door, and there was this man with her, and she wanted to make an appointment, and he seemed really nice and smiling, and so she was here from the Bahamas, and my girlfriend was with me that I've known since second grade, and she's kind of intuitive, and I made the appointment. The lady came in the next day, and I assumed it was her husband, maybe an older guy. And so I'm doing the reading, and her husband's energy seemed really awful, kind of abusive and controlling. And I said, "Do you mind my asking who was the man with you?" Because I thought maybe she had a boyfriend, or I really thought maybe it was, a brother or something. And she just gave me the weirdest look and shot back, and she said, "There wasn't anybody with me. I'm here by myself." And I'm like, yeah, there was. Like, he was right behind you. I mean, he was very supportive, kind, and I realized it was her dad that had passed away.
Wow.
And I was kind of shocked because that's the most solid apparition I've seen in a while. I just assumed he was real. And I asked my girlfriend. She saw him too.
Wow.
I think a lot of people would have seen him, honestly. I was amazed by it. But normally I'll get more of an energy form. Like, and then I've learned to pick up information. Like, I'll sort of almost like reach my energy towards them and kind of it's almost like feeling around for information, and I'll get like in my mind's eye images, I'll get feelings of emotion. I'll get I'll try to find out like how they passed, things like that. Occasionally I'll hear names, but it's a kind of a process like that, but it doesn't feel scary.
Yeah.
It feels neutral.
I remember I read a book. I don't remember the name now, but also seen it in certain people, especially people that might have this take on their role as a medium, like that they explain themselves that way. As sometimes there is this tendency that because of my role, I need to take this burden on me, and then they go into all this dark, like heavy stuff and carry it around with them all the time, and there is this good intention in a way that it is because of my role I need to take this burden, and it seems really painful to hold on to that, and I don't think it's necessary.
It's really not the way to go. I've heard like mothers say, I said give me the pain, and you can feel it, like when I'm rummaging around, I'll let it impress on me briefly just so I understand it. But when I train, different healing methods and, with Reiki, you're bringing energy down through you and then out, like forward. And, so nothing's coming back. It's kind of like probably getting an IV or something. And when you really need to have a strong energy boundary, and I call it like you've got a healthy energy immune system. It's strong and built, and pretty well where you start and stop. And a lot of that's just noticing it, paying attention. I've learned so much over time. But when I was younger, and most people I think like this, you think because you can't necessarily see spirits. A lot of people can't. I don't know. I just can. Maybe genetics or something. But they feel it, and then they get all terrified, and you go into fight or flight, and they feel like it can just come into you, or it can, like do anything at once, and it really can't. It actually takes like a permission to come in, and that's why I'm not a huge fan of channeling. I mean, because I've thought about it, and to me it's just like, no, you just stay over there and tell me, and then I'll tell the person.
I've also gone through that, because right now I'm experimenting a bit with channeling, but it's two different ways of actually go about it, in a sense that I'm not. It doesn't feel right, that kind of takeover channel, in a way. Like they take over you.
Where you black out, don't remember anything.
I don't like that one. I haven't tried it either, but it doesn't feel right. But the way of connecting and letting it through you, that makes sense to me in more way.
And it's too close to attachments and possession in my head. And it's funny. Like, I did a Skype thing for Jaime Musan, who's well known in Mexico, for a show he was doing called Tercer Millenniano, and I was just the hypnotic expert, and it was just so short you barely saw it, but they were investigating Stan Romanek, and he said he's a well-known abductee, and he was fairly public a few years back, and he claimed to be interviewing this, or channeling this guy, this alien called Grandfather, and he did write out some physics equations and some ancient Sumerian, and he did it even in hypnosis with his eyes closed. And he's kind of a little bit of an odd person, and there's been some accusations that he's, you know, like a flim-flam guy, and but that's not uncommon in that field. But I feel like he is a true contactee. But I was telling them, you can't just, people sometimes give information that's channeled way more credibility or credence because it came that way, and you shouldn't. It should only be if it really makes sense or means something, you know, because honestly, people that channel, especially when they're dabbling, you don't know who it is.
Yeah, that's true.
It could be just, you know,
can be anyone.
Yeah, serial killer, creepy guy, Mother Teresa. You know, you're just not sure sometimes.
It's true.
Yeah, so until you get a pretty good spiritual immune system, I would kind of be careful with it. And then I don't think there's any problem. I get information by just going in the energy field of the being and letting them kind of give me thoughts.
Seems like to me that sometimes it's easier for people to allow information in if it's like in the container of being a channel information.
Right.
But I think like when you're actually the higher way of doing it would be that it doesn't need to be this or that way, in the sense that it doesn't need to be labeled, channeled by this and this spirit or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, we're all kind of, you know, there's different terms for the ethers or the collective unconscious, morphic resonance, you know, Akashic records. It's just the energy that we're all swimming in and we're all part of, and everything's made of. And that's why you can know things about somebody across the world, or why you can go back into the past or look forward or do that, because we're just in that whole sea of it, and our bodies are just our cars. You know, our soul is connected.
So when you work with people, how much of your work is actually regression and what is other things? And
it kind of shakes out. It'll go in spurts, but it kind of shakes out 50-50 with readings, healings. I have some people that just want their chakras balanced, you know, and we do a reading in that. And you know, and then the other half is people that want to do a regression. Some just, you know, I can see they have a lot of past life influence in their reading, and they'll decide they want to try it. And then other people know about it, you know, probably more like you, where maybe you'd heard of it or were curious.
Yeah.
I
don't remember at the time exactly where I was in my process, because when I was here the first time, I had tried it, and I had a really powerful experience back in Norway, which was that I found this person. No, actually, that was I mixed up two different things now. I think the first time I did it was in a hotel room, listening to a YouTube guide.
Oh, okay.
And I got this strong image of a past life with a lot of details in it.
Yeah.
And this was in a time where I just started doing what, you know, this. I told you I'm writing a book now. It's called Finding Malibu.
Right.
The whole thing about this book is to follow your inner guide, you know, and realize that you have intuition and that there are guides with you and helping you and all these things. You know?
Right.
So this whole idea started during that time, which was probably 2014 or something.
Yeah.
And I was very focused on that at the time, following the signs, you know, and I, after having that experience, I think the same day or the day after, I was in a small town in Norway at a job, and I was just going out to just go for a walk, and I was passing by this cafeteria or something, and I heard someone talking with a accent or dialect in Norway from another town far away from where I was, and I just got this insight like, wow, I have to go to Bergen. I need to go, and I don't know why. And then there was at the time I was very free. I didn't have a job. I was working freelance, small jobs here and there, because I was also intensely going through an awakening. I wasn't functioning in daily life that very much. So I had a lot of time, you know.
Right.
So the day after, I just actually the same day I bought the train ticket to the town.
Yeah.
And I went there. And I was going on this mountaintop where I could have a view over the whole city in Bergen.
Yeah.
It's a small town on the west coast. Not that small, really, but yeah. So I was, and then I had this idea that, okay, can I maybe is there a hike to walk to that I can take down to get more air?
Yeah.
And I opened my Google Maps, and for some reason the GPS wasn't. It showed me a totally different place in Bergen.
Huh.
Like, wow, what's happening here? And as I was trying to navigate my finding where I was, I realized, wow, that building looks very familiar.
Oh.
How come? And then I just got this, shock in my body. Like, wow, can it be that building that I saw in the dream or in the regression?
Yeah.
And I knew I had to check it out. And as I was going there, getting closer and closer, I got these chills in my body, and I was so freaked out because I knew that, okay, there is something here.
Yeah.
And I had to come into the backyard of this huge building, and because what I saw in the regression was that I was working in a big office. I was some kind of a doctor or something.
Yeah.
So it's a huge office, and there was one person standing in the doorway telling me I had to come outside of the building, and she was leading me outside, and we was watching out in the backyard, huge backyard.
Yeah.
And there was like dead people everywhere, and people working with dead people, like packing them in or like and there was blood everywhere, and there was a really weird place.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand what it was or anything. And this person I saw, I didn't realize if it was like an employee or if it was like my wife or something. I wasn't sure about those things.
Right.
But I saw all of that. So when I went into I couldn't go into the building, but I could go in the backyard, and everything was the same, the same details on the building. So I was shocked, like,
yeah.
And then a few hours later, I remember I was sitting on the stairs of a church in the city with a good view over the whole city. I was sitting there feeling like really alone in this experience because it was so new to me.
Yeah.
And I messaged like a spiritual teacher that I knew. I had just gotten to know. And I asked him, like, do you think it would be possible that this whole idea about past life is really true?
Yeah.
And I remember he was just saying one word, like, yes. And that gave me permission, to like, okay, if he can believe it, I can also allow myself to explore that deeper,
What's interesting about, like people like you and me and really anybody that's interested in this stuff, there's all sorts of opinions and ideas all over the place. And I know when I was working on my website, I just was trying not to use like weird buzzwords. I just wanted to try to write it in normal language. Yeah. But you can get people will be very adamant and dogmatic about their beliefs and what's true, and they'll say, this is true. And it, maybe it is for them, but it might not be for somebody else. And when people are first exploring, everything's possible. You don't know what to believe or buy. And the best way is just if it feels right to you.
Yeah.
Because, when you're growing up. I mean, I didn't have a ton of religious dogma in my childhood, but I know a lot of people do. And, you know, they're told strict rules and regulations, and then school and science, and you can't believe this. And it, a lot of times that resistance or fear isn't really coming from you. It's all the stuff people have told you.
And for me, I think one of my biggest blocks in the beginning, at least, and still sometimes, is that this idea that I since I've developed this analytical mind,
right?
I think that if I cannot present it as clear and as true in a perfect way, it's not going to be okay for the other person to receive my message or experience. You know?
It's really funny because I've learned over time, like when I studied with the medium, I would never approach someone and say, oh, you know, Uncle Bob's by you or something. But like an engineer, an experience I had at the office, that office also had a ghost that would walk up and down the halls. But I was working late with one of the girls that worked for me, and we were the only two there, and we heard the alarm on the door, like it opened and closed, but just the beep. So we look out the door of the office towards the front, and the door's closed. So, and then there's a long hallway where the ghost would walk up and down, and the other door. So she went hauling down that hallway and checked that door, and I opened the other one and looked out, and there's no one. And she came back and she said, no, it was locked. And then she said, I saw something floating down the hallway. And I said, okay, let's go look. So we start moving that direction, you know, and the first office on the right, and there's always a lot of energy there. And I think it was across the way, there was a hub where I did all the, you know, connections for the computers. And you know, it could have been putting off EMFs, and I think that gives energy to spirits. But we turned into the first office, and that's one of the few times where I got that whole, my hair stood up, you know, you feel the get out, or who are you? And I was just like, it's in here. And it just, I felt like, okay, let's just go. And so we got our stuff and went home. And then the next day I asked one of the other engineers, where the guy that was in that office, Wes, was. And she said, oh, his mom died last night or yesterday, and he's flying back to Poland to see her. And I said, really? And I said, what time? And it was right at the time that happened. And I think her soul must have attracted into his office to looking for him. And so when he came back, I went in and I was debating this, and I said, Wes, I have a ghost story for you. And he's like, okay. And I told him, and he just listened. And then he said, you know, the cousin that was sitting with his mom and the nurse, the mom said, she's going to go in about, or the nurse said, she's going to go in about 5 minutes. And the cousin's like, what? What are you talking about? And the nurse just knew. And then while they were watching the mom, after about 5 minutes, they could see her soul just leave. They saw the energy come out. And then she must have headed straight over to her son, you know. And so I was just kind of like, wow. But he, you know, typical engineer, I think that was all a big surprise, but he was open to it because of the time frame. And I noticed the more I was willing to sort of tell people things, the more information that came through. And it's the same way, the more you have those experiences, oh, I have to go to Bergen, and then, oh, there's this weird building. And the more you sort of listen to it and follow it, and it's not creating horrible problems, you know, it's answering. You kind of feel, you might feel nervous, but when you get there, it's okay, this makes sense.
It was a huge relief to
so it's like you're following breadcrumbs, because I think language is cumbersome, but energy, feelings, and thoughts are more concise. And I think that's the way we get communicated with.
And I think I remember in that time it was, and also this trip I had in 2015 here, that whole period was really like so exciting, even though it was hard because I had to go through a lot of emotion and cleaning up some things. But it was like this excitement, the adventure of life, like, okay, there are actually more to this, and if I follow the signs, if I follow my guide, is like it will show me things that makes me feel better. And one interesting thing as well about that story with the regression is that actually this year in January I met this person who she contacted me through my videos online, and she had this feeling like, okay, I know you, and I think we will work together. I don't know how, but I just know. And I was a bit skeptical, to be honest, but I was also open. So we met and we sat down and talked, and the talk was flowing like instantly, and it was so beautiful. But and then we started talking about past lives experiences, and I was telling this story. And I got so emotional because I realized that she was the one standing in the doorway.
See, it's so odd when there's that recognition because it just, something feels so familiar. But I love that when you have that full recognition. That's amazing.
It is. And now we actually have started one project together. We had one workshop now with me and her leading a workshop with five people, just talking about intuition, awareness, and it was so beautiful to have that experience as well, and also for me to recognize that if I have the trust to like just let things unfold, to also be like wowed about the things that comes through me, guiding meditations in the group and the things I was speaking, it was like I was amazed, like, where's this coming from? But in a very comfortable and trusting way. So
it's like when you come in, you sort of know some of that stuff, but you do get amnesia, so you're not like running around killing people that hurt you in the past, or you get amnesia, so it's like a clean slate. And yet there are things you've learned in your soul, and but then you get all this programming piled on top of you by parents, by teachers, by peers, and then you spend the next while peeling all that back off. But when you really get down to who you are and what rings right and what you enjoy, things just get more and more magical and fun. And a lot of people feel very like, oh, I have to go to work, I have to do, and it's, that can all shift, if you kind of really get on your track and your path, and you'll be fine. Like you won't have to worry. And I think there's some people that their struggle is about abundance, like they struggle with that concept, but so that may be more of a challenge. But a lot of people are past that, and so it's more like love or friends or trusting life. But boy, once you get into the fun part, it's really fun.
It is. So the one question that arises when you talked about this thing about seeing things or experiencing energies, and I think I'm not sure, but I think I have some fear around one thing, because when it comes to experiencing like either people on the other side, like people that have died, or any kind of spirit, is like when I can sense it, or when I can also have this experience of communicating, but then it's everything is like inside my mind in a way. But I still realized I've had some of these experiences where I just can I can lie in my bed and suddenly be extremely afraid that what if something actually comes into the physical?
Yeah.
Because I haven't really experienced that. I feel comfortable over everything that is not in the physical, but that is like,
yeah.
How do I deal with that, or how do I approach that?
It's a funny thought, because I know when I first started realizing there were guides, because I'd never really heard of that, and I never really thought, like, people I think might think they're angels, or guides just a word, but they're beings that are more mature, that care about us and they want to help us. And this one, my friend that I jokingly I called her my psychic pimp, that I've known since college, she seemed to always introduce me to people I needed to meet, and was very supportive of everything. And she took me to this girl's house, and this girl was talking freely about her guides, and and she saw them like full on, like the way they looked, everything. And I just could see two like energy forms. One was sort of more of a pinkish, and the other one was like more of just like energy movement. Yeah. And the lights were flickering, and that happens a lot when people first start being attuned. They'll just notice like glitchy stuff in electronics, but particularly lights, because you can see it and it gets your attention. And I started like going, I started asking, like, can you guys see that? Or like, I'm not sure if it's just me or if everybody can. But I remember just going, what, now you have these people with you? Like, do they go into the bathroom with you, or are they like, watch you sleep? Like, I was like kind of weirded out about the whole thing. And then you start to kind of realize they really don't care about human stuff like that. They care about your soul's progression. And creepy stuff has a much lower vibration. And it's really funny with that same girl. She called my friend to have me come over. So we went over there, like, this is probably like 6 months later. And she said the one male guide had kind of gone, and she didn't know why. But she felt something going on, and she was sitting like in a corner, and we were sitting across the way. And as she was talking, and this is the first and only time I've ever seen this, but a black cloud formed over her head. It got bigger and bigger, and I could feel like almost like how the lowest part of a piano sound, a very low vibration. And it just was so creepy. And I'm like, you've got this little thing over your head. She said, oh, I know what to do about it. And so apparently she knew how to clear it. And I've since, anybody can clear their environment. There's really, I think sometimes when people like claim they've gotten scratched or that kind of thing, they could be like expecting something and manifest it. Their poltergeist activity a lot of times is coming from kids with crazy, it's like spoon bending, they're upset and books will fly. Some of it's not, it's like us, but the even full-on creepy energy cannot hurt you unless you let it in. And all you have to do is just ask your guides for help and say, and visualize your room just cleared out and only for you, and guides are people that are, beings that are good for you. It's
good to remember that. I think it has been a huge, I remember it was a huge shift for me when I understood that concept of permission, like you talked about earlier, like that whole thing. I haven't connected those two things, like the permission and being afraid of those things. But
because when you're a little kid, I could give you a few examples of when things attach to kids, but a lot of times they're afraid, like they're being molested or beaten or left alone or something, and then this energy just sees it like a predator and moves in like, I'll protect you, I'll keep you safe, and the kid's just like, okay. And, it seems like a good idea at the time.
Yeah.
And then half the time they kind of forget that ever even happened. And then it starts causing problems like wanting them to drink or, act out. And sometimes they don't remember.
There's one thing that maybe you have some perspective on that I come to mind. There is a friend that has, he told me about this experience he had. Like, he have had some issues with addiction, with sugar especially.
Yeah.
In an extreme way. Like, because on one side he's the healthiest guy I know.
Yeah.
Like he does all this thing about eating well and all these things, but and then he kind of turns around and he goes all into being taken over by something. I just have to survive by eating actually so much sugar that he passes out.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds.
It's been a struggle for a long time.
Yeah.
And he had this dream that he was kind of fighting or something with some kind of a weird animal I don't remember how it looked. And then it bit him.
Oh.
And he was actually waking up by that and jumping the bed and actually hitting the wall, the floor.
Yeah.
And after that, he actually had a mark on his fingers.
Wow.
Physical mark and he felt that was connected with that kind of with the thing about the addiction. So,
I mean, I could tell you a number of stories about that.
Yeah.
It truly, you can. Not everything's human, and not everything that. Some energies are just, troublemakers like jinn or, tricksters, or they're just see an opening, see somebody's fear or issue, and then they go in and, exploit it. Yeah. And then we all have things, so that we're working on. And, but the fear can really make it exacerbate. But it also, part of what I don't do it as much because I think a lot of attachments just don't want to come anywhere near me. But, in hypnosis, detach them, clear them, because they can't really stay. And a lot of times in hypnosis, the person can really distinguish, there's something there. They can visualize it and, your guides, and that can all be just cleared away and gone for good, and I usually send it up for recycling, or if someone can handle it, but don't stick around and jump to your friend, because I've seen things like that jump family members. One girl I worked with at the 12-step store, I had, once again, I think my guides kind of pushed me into learning about this, but I was reading about it and books just kept coming to me about it. And I was talking to her about it because she had been in recovery for alcohol. And I had overheard her telling one of the other girls that every time she was fooling around with a guy, she would start thinking heavily about drinking Jack Daniels, and which seems so specific. And so I talked to her about attachments, and I said, where were you when you were around that age? Because I don't know why that just comes up a lot. 3. And they had moved in with her grandfather that was like a famous football coach. Had a horrible drinking problem with Jack Daniels. And he died when she was 3. Yeah. And apparently glommed on. And, he's a football coach, probably didn't like the idea of fooling around with a guy. And so he would rather she go drink, and then he could do his thing. And sometimes, and then I offered to help her with that, and she's like, no, I'm fine. And so some people are comfortable with it, or they don't, they let it come back. And sometimes people with attachments, somebody else brings them to me, like, fix them, and like one woman, they had a series of like salon type stores, and her husband was an engineer, but he helped with it. And he was half like Egyptian, half Iranian, and very good looking guy. his dad was like a prince or something, and they just put him in a boarding school, and he was very young, like 4 or something, and he'd maybe see his mom once a year and the dad like every 5 years. And so he was more or less, I'm sure, felt kind of abandoned. And I think he got molested, abused, just, he's a little vulnerable kid. And he was working late at the office with this other younger guy. I'd say he was about maybe in his 40s, early 40s, and the kid said, "I gotta go." And he's like, "No, we're not done." And he's like, "Yeah, I gotta go, I'm going." And he's like, "No." And the kid got up and started running. So he got up and started running after him. And then he could hear something running after him. And breathing. And he got terrified and ran down into the parking lot. But he said he felt it overcome him. And then he was in the parking lot just ranting and raving and, yelling and sweating. And the kid called his wife, and the police came, and she took him home. And then after that, he couldn't go into the bathroom by himself. He couldn't go back to the office. And so she's like, we got a problem here, So we did a couple of regressions and cleared, but he wasn't very, he had that kind of macho, I'm fine, I can handle this. But he was really having a problem, so that's why, he agreed to it. And so we're clearing. Most of the time, they'll just go, that person's on board. They're like, get out, and, and they go. And so we did a lot of clearing, and then he comes out of it, and he goes in the bathroom here. And I had another client coming, and he's in there kind of a while. And then he comes out, and he was standing like right there by the door, and his eyes are like saucers, they're really big, and he's just sweating, and he's going, and he's staring dead at me. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have to physically fight with an attachment now. And so I just, thought, well, I'm just going to talk to him. So I started calling his name, saying what happened, and then he kind of came back up. And they'd gone in the bathroom and challenged it in the mirror, and then it came right back. Which was not, I said, don't do that. You're giving it I said, from here on out, you get any thought of it, just forget that and focus somewhere else, and don't give it any attention, and we did one more clearing after that. But he was pretty, like almost fully possessed. And but we were able to kick it back out. But he opened, by doing that, he was more or less challenging it to come back.
Exactly.
And he didn't have a strong immune system yet. So
what is like when you have been working with different people with regressions, what's been kind of the most meaningful, or I don't know, I'm just interested in hearing some kind of aspects around it, or
I guess, there's been some people are really good subjects. They just go under and they're in it, and lots of people cry or get scared, or, they have really, they're kind of extreme feelings, but they're honestly what they've already been having that's been holding them back. From, one was, she was a student from Chapman's mother, and she was married to a prominent man in Mexico, and he's abusive and scary. And I remember the first time I did readings for a couple of the family, I could just see this dark thing there, and I'm like, that's creepy. And, her sisters had issues with it. And the youngest that I'm kind of friends with now, and she's gone on to become a doctor, but she, can also see dark energy. And I think she kind of came in as the youngest child to sort of, I think he was a little afraid of her. But the mom finally did a regression because they kind of had to escape, basically, hide at families and get asylum and, everything. And so they became citizens, and they're all extremely smart family. But the mom just never moved on, really, and she went under and had a past life in what seemed like Spanish Inquisition. And it was like her parents were taken off in their land, like she'd come from having something to nothing and was put under as a ward, like when she was like 5, under this kind of starchy, mean woman that made her scrub floors and all of that. And there was like a son that just was really mean to her, like it really would stare her down, and and she was scared of him. And then finally, when she was like 14 or something, she was outside and he was saying stuff to her and coming at her, and she was panicking really bad. And sometimes with people I have to say, it's okay, just float up, and then go back, and because it's better if you can work through it. And he beat her to death with a stone.
Wow.
And, just was like he hated her. And it's funny, but that was her ex-husband. And I've seen a few cases of that, and then they come back and then they marry the person, and they're probably supposed to be doing better, but they fall into old ways.
Yeah.
And in her case, she needed to stand up to him and get past her extreme fear, and it cleared it. And then she divorced him after all those years. She had never been able to finally do it, and then moved on and remarried. And so,
it's like, I've heard also people saying in this time we are in now that it's like, I'm a big supporter of following, where you guided, like we talked about.
Right.
So I think to what extent you need to look into different aspects of reality or how things are connected depends on where you need to find your way.
Yeah.
But I also heard recently a few times people talking about this time we are in, or this now, that this concept of going back to past lives is kind of dead. We don't need to do that anymore. The Akashic records are already cleared and all these things. And I'm not sure. It's like in one aspect, it makes something of it makes a bit sense. But in another aspect, I don't believe it's that simple, in the sense that you can escape it or just ignore it, in the sense that I
think for a lot of people that may be true, but I get people that are having a problem that like one girl, she had eczema her entire life, just really bad. And she'd read Brian Weiss's books when she was 12 because the friend's mom gave it to the friend, and the friend wouldn't read it, so she liked the mom, so she read it. And, she had a master's, and she was just, for some reason, she's going through this bad time. She found me, and I think people that need to find me.
Yeah.
And she was here 8 hours. I mean, it was really in depth, but she really got stuck in kind of an in-between area, and it was dark, and she said she thought I had a flashlight because she could see a light moving, and I've heard this a few times now. And so but I didn't know that but she said she could see it over on the other side of the room, like I'd be shining at her from another side, but could hear my voice where I was, so she knew it wasn't me. And she was terrified, and we finally got light to come in and got her free of this place. I don't know what it was, but it was somewhere, I guess a part of her soul or something had been stuck. And I told her that she would recall anything that from this lifetime that was affecting her upon awakening. And then, and we got a little bit into a past life, but I brought her out. At a certain point, it's diminishing returns. You just get what you can. And she just sat up and she goes, Oh, and she remembered when she was 3, her dad left the family, and that was it, gone. And her mom had to, take care of the 2 kids, and the mom was resentful and kind of took stuff out on her. And finally, the dad's mom came and stayed with her like a nanny, and she just loved her. And she was so close, but she remembered having the thought, I'm going to have to take care of my 1.5-year-old sister. How am I going to do that at 3? She was thinking this.
Wow.
And and she just that's when the really bad eczema started. And by realizing that and letting that go, that she had carried subconsciously that whole time, and now as an adult she can look back and understand that was a fight or flight childhood survival fear that didn't happen. And then her eczema cleared up, and she'd been to doctors, and it's, to me, it's a good idea. If you have a physical problem, go to doctors. But if they're saying no, you're fine, and it's not clearing up, there's a good chance there's something else. There's something psychological, and it's your body trying to tell you something. And it's the same way with anxieties, phobias, fears.
Really.
They're trying to tell you something, and it's in that way that you don't always understand logically. And it's not, people, I think, that are saying, hey, it's all in the past, it's all good. There's no 100% thing, and I think it's a little bit ego to, to make proclamations like that.
Yeah, I think so too. But I also think like everyone has their own journey and needs the things they do.
Yeah.
But I think for me, when I think about this whole past life idea, that when I look to my journey, is one big aspect of it has been just to have references that kind of connects the whole thing together and makes me trust more that it's all connected. So to me, it's just having the experiences of like meeting you, going into regression. Just the experience itself is valuable, not me with or without what actually happens in the experience,
because you're actually moving into who you are beyond your body. Because people change sex, gender, religions. I've had people go back to other planets. I mean, we're, our cousins, but everybody's got a different path and history, and a lot of people want everything to fit in this box of this lifetime neatly. And there's those things that just don't.
Yeah, it is. But do you experience, is there a big difference in how easy it is for people to connect with it? Like for me yesterday when we had the regression, it was like very different from the last time. And I caught myself in trying to like not analyze too much, or like the process of coming into the space. I was kind of struggling a little bit to like, okay, does it look like last time, or should I do better? Like the inner dialogue was kind of struggling a bit, but still I realized my body was actually going down into it. So I realized it was still working. It was just my inner dialogue going on.
That's what's funny about hypnosis. The first time I ever did it, I did the same. I was really doing more like, I don't know, I don't think I'm under, I can think, and I'm making this up, and blah blah blah. But I did see a few things, and then the next time I was in a class, it was uncomfortable, we're on the floor. But something about it, I just, I just went under, and I started getting glimpses of the life that affected me the most. And it took me 4 different times to put the whole thing together. And the last one was when I was doing hypnosis training. But and I usually tell people up front, I use this example. I say, think of a bird. And then I'll say, what'd you think of? And they'll be like, and I hear everything, crow, bluebird, penguin,
Yeah.
and then I'll start saying, well, what was it doing, and what's the background look like, and they'll start answering the questions. I go, that's all happening in your mind's eye. That's where the information comes up at.
Yeah.
And they've wired people up and seen, like when you're doing a regression, it comes out of the memory section of your brain, or when you're imagining, it's a different section. And people come up with information, that you could verify sometimes. And to me, that's not really the point, but, it's interesting. And I usually tell people, as best you can, your body will be relaxed. Your mind, it's called a focused state of concentration. So your mind isn't asleep. You're not a zombie. I've had people get up and go to the bathroom and come back and go right under. It's really just like a alpha wave, one step down from consciousness. Yeah. And when they land and when they get there, think like a reporter in a weird environment, that all you're doing is collecting facts. You're not analyzing it at all. Yeah. And then that kind of allows people to start talking. And I've even had people, like, if they're struggling, like, I'll say, okay, so just imagine this, and start describing that. And then they'll start describing, and I'll usually have them go to a house or something. And 99% of the time, that's the house in the past life that they need to go to.
Yeah. But yesterday, what I was struggling with a bit was that, okay, so without going into the details, I had, when I came here, I had a really clear memory that I had, revealed through actually being actually fainting through a needle from an acupuncturist. So that brought me into a clear memory of something that I didn't have too much information about.
Right.
So that was a thing. And that set off a kind of, and there was a link from that to a person, and the whole regression actually turned out to be, let me see, 3 or 4 people that I know in my life today that came up through that regression.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. I think 4 or 5 even. I think there was a 5th person.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
so my struggle was that I wanted, in my head, I wanted to add information that made sense, from the things I expected to see.
Right.
But I was amazed about the information that came out when I let go of that part and just connected everything so neatly together.
Usually once people start describing, and that's why a lot of times I'm asking, like, well, what are the clothes like? What are the shoes like? Tell me about your hair, or tell me about their hair. And it sounds really mundane, but you start forgetting to analyze, and then you start kind of paying more attention to what's happening, and then you deepen in, and then I have different tricks for kind of working around resistance, but ironically, sometimes people that are really like metaphysical, and they've studied all sorts of things, and they have all these expectations, sometimes they have a worse time than like an engineer or a doctor, because they come in and I say, okay, do this, do that, and they're very good rule followers, and they're left brain, but as long as they're not opposed to it, or and initially, sometimes I'll hear, I'm seeing this, and I'm like, okay. Because honestly, like Brian Weiss, he said, if you're at the pyramids and you see a Volkswagen pop up, he said, maybe it's a symbol for something. Normally, people are pretty, much in it. Like they're like, it's like they're watching something, and it comes up a lot of times sort of like in scenes, not like a continuous flow. It's like this image, and then you might get a little video clip type thing, and then you get a feeling, and then you get some knowing about the connections, and it just starts to kind of flow together.
Yeah. One more thing about that just reminded me. Sometimes in my life I've had experiences where I see things in my inner mind, or I sense it. Like now, this whole thing about needles yesterday. I was looking into was there more about it? I wasn't sure, And it came to me later that it was not necessarily needles, but more like knives,
Oh.
And right now, also when you talked about it, this sense came back to me. Like there's knives in my back, scratching or cutting in my shoulders.
Interesting.
It's just a sense that I can allow to be there.
Yeah.
And I've had other experiences like that where it's kind of someone cutting my head in like what is this called in English?
Your temple.
Yeah. There is someone with a knife there, and I've realized that if I resist the feeling when I sense it, it just gets stronger.
Interesting.
And one time I had this experience that there was a meditation in a huge room with a lot of people, and this thing was coming. This image of the knife in my head.
That's probably another one to look at.
Yeah, and then I allowed it to happen in the meditation. Like, okay, what happens if I don't struggle to have the experience again or whatever?
Right.
And that it led me into some kind of experience in that that just played out. Actually, about 2 other people in the room.
Yeah.
I was seeing them there doing something, and it just played out, and then it was gone. I didn't think more about it. So.
Well, sometimes when you meet certain people and they're from a past life, that's what happened to me when I met my husband. About a month or two before that, I started getting a terrible phobia about being strangled, and I've never been strangled, and I was having nightmares. I was kind of mystified by it. And then I dated him for 6 months and broke up and went out with this other guy. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in love, And the whole time I'm just like, nobody can touch my neck. Choking. Like if I'd get upset, my neck would turn bright red. And, all these things that are just like, where's that from? And in hindsight, I had a lot of illnesses like around my neck and even down to thyroid issues, and and it was because both of them were in the past life that affected me the most. My husband was my son. It was like I was really young and I was married off to this guy because I was pregnant by like a church elder, and I was like 13 or something, and my mom noticed and married me off, and then that guy was just horrible, controlling, would yank me around, jealous, and eventually just choked me out when the son was about 12 and just killed me, and I died thinking, well, I'm not doing this again. I'm not getting married. I'm not having kids. I'm not, I'm going to take care of myself. And I think was in maybe the 1500s, and it seemed kind of like maybe Italian Alps or something, because there was like farm, and I just I think I waited all that time to deal with it. And I had nightmares with that guy in it. And but after I finally put it together, it's like, oh, that's why I didn't want to get married or have kids in this life, And I think if my husband hadn't been my son in that life, I didn't marry him for 10 years, but I probably wouldn't have married. Yeah, because I was just like, no, it's not safe.
It's interesting how those things are connected.
But it'll either be like a fear, something suddenly happens with your, those feelings like being stabbed or tightness or back problems, or you'll meet a person and then it's on. And you can do psychology, you can read, you can intellectually pursue it all you want. But when you have a panic attack from it or something, it doesn't help that. You can take medicine to try to drug yourself out of it, but it's a lot easier to just kind of get down to the core of it, clear it, and then you're free.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so there are times and reasons it's helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're to the end of the episode.
Okay.
It's been very interesting, and I'm so happy that you wanted to join and be part of this.
Me too.
Yeah.
It was great talking to you. I always enjoy talking to you.
You've been listening to the Infinite Podcast with
Ulf Tønderflytter.
and me, Øystein Rabbe.
Thank you so much for listening. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify.
Yeah. And or on Facebook or...
Yeah, follow us on Facebook.
Yeah.
And also, we've now made a Patreon account.
Yes.
So if you like this podcast and would like to support us, go to Patreon and check out our Infinite Podcast site there. Your support would really appreciate it.
It's possible for us to make more podcasts. It takes a lot of time. We enjoy it so much to do it, but we also have regular jobs to pay the bills, and our dream is to be able to do this full time.
Yeah, this is our full time. This could be our full time.
Baby steps towards that dream, and we want to make more episodes and continue to share it with you. So that would be great. Actually, I realized when we talk about it, we haven't even explained what Patreon actually is. So
it's like a support site where you can support a business or
artist or
an artist or whatever
creator that makes something
with I guess like monthly donations. Could be like from $1 and upwards.
Yeah.
Right? So anything would be great. We would be so thankful. And you would be thankful because we're doing this for you.
Yeah. And it actually gives it's a good feeling sometimes to actually help the things you care about. So if you're listening to us and you care about us, but I mean seriously, it's a good thing to contribute to the things that matters to you. So
that will help them grow.
We're not asking you to pay unless you actually want to see this podcast grow and unfold into what it's about to become.
Infinite greatness.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.